Sarah never imagined that her office job could turn into such a terrible nightmare. It all began when David, an apparently ordinary coworker, started showing excessive interest in her. Initially, it was just innocent questions about her plans for the weekend or subtle compliments about her appearance. However, as days turned into weeks, Sarah began to notice subtle signs that something was not right. David always seemed to be around at unexpected moments. He appeared in the hallways, during coffee breaks, and even in places outside the office where Sarah frequented. His smiles became increasingly enigmatic, and his eyes seemed to hide dark secrets. Sarah began to feel a growing discomfort whenever she was near him, but she maintained polite courtesy, hoping his strange behavior was just a result of poorly managed shyness. The first gifts arrived anonymously, a bouquet of fresh flowers discreetly left on her desk, a complimentary note in her locker. Sarah initially felt flattered, but the sensation of being watched and monitored began to grow inside her like an insidious weed. She realized that David knew far more about her personal life than any coworker should. Things took a sinister turn when Sarah started receiving text messages from an unknown number. They were vague messages, but suggestive enough to send chills down her spine. She tried to ignore the situation, convincing herself she was just imagining things. However, the gifts continued to arrive, increasingly frequent and intrusive. Sarah now found herself looking over her shoulder at every corner, always expecting to see David's unsettling face lurking in the crowd. What started as harmless admiration was turning into something much darker and disturbing. As the gifts and messages continued to arrive, Sarah could no longer ignore the disturbing truth. David was obsessed with her. Discomfort turned to fear when she began to notice that he was always one step ahead of her, appearing in places where she least expected. It was as if he knew her movements before she even planned them. On a particularly cold autumn day, Sarah decided to work overtime in the office to finish an important project. Most colleagues had already left when she heard a strange sound coming from the hallway. Instinctively, she left her desk to investigate, only to find a letter left on top of her keyboard. The paper was folded several times, as if it had been handled many times before reaching her. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope to find a series of photographs, pictures of her taken in intimate and private moments, such as when she was alone at home or at the gym. The shock and violation of her privacy hit her like a punch to the stomach. How did David get these photos? How long had he been watching her? Sarah's hands trembled as she examined each image, realizing how close David had been to her without her knowledge. She felt completely exposed and vulnerable. But the unsettling discoveries didn't stop there. During her investigations to understand what was happening, Sarah discovered that David maintained an obsessive collection of items related to her. From newspaper clippings mentioning her name to voice notes recorded on his phone, detailing her every move. He even had a file with magazine clippings featuring her, as if he were creating a secret shrine in her honor. Sarah's fear turned to dread when she found a locked cabinet in David's office. With trembling hands, she managed to open the lock and found a box containing even more disturbing items. Letters written to her, some never delivered, and even a small photo album of Emily, the coworker who had disappeared months ago. Sarah confronted a terrifying truth. David was not only obsessed with her, but also involved in something much more sinister and dangerous. Sarah's heart raced as she tried to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. She now knew she needed to be extremely careful, as she was dealing with someone whose obsession exceeded the limits of sanity. The day Sarah had always feared finally arrived. After weeks of growing paranoia and fear, David surprised her as she was returning home from work. He appeared suddenly, blocking her path, and before Sarah could react, he forced her into his car. She found herself trapped in the passenger seat, her heart pounding frantically in her chest. David drove in silence, but Sarah could feel his intense gaze on her. The silence was deafening, only broken by the sound of the engine and Sarah's rapid breathing. She tried to stay calm, struggling to think of a way to escape. Each corner they turned seemed to take them further away from the safety she desperately longed for. Finally, The car stopped in front of what seemed like an ordinary house in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah was dragged inside by David, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. She was now inside her stalker's house, where the air felt charged with unbearable tension. David led her through a maze of dark corridors until they reached a locked door. He unlocked it with a key Sarah never knew where he had gotten from, and what she saw on the other side made her stop breathing. She entered a small, dark room where the walls were covered with photographs. Photographs of her, in intimate and private moments, but also of someone else she immediately recognized. Emily, the missing coworker. The images were disturbing. Some showed Emily in moments of vulnerability, while others were simply photos of her walking down the street or getting into her car. Sarah felt a wave of nausea as she realized what this meant. David was not only obsessed with her but was also involved in Emily's disappearance. She was trapped in a place where David's darkest secrets were exposed before her eyes. As Sarah struggled to keep calm, she saw an opportunity. David was momentarily distracted, rummaging through a drawer beside her. With a surge of courage, she turned and ran through the open door, ignoring the pain in her twisted ankle as she stumbled down the stairs. She ran out of the house, ignoring David's screams echoing behind her. She ran as fast as she could, every step a race for her life. Her heart was beating so loudly it felt like everyone around could hear it. Finally, after a frantic run, Sarah spotted a police car patrolling nearby. She ran to them, her words coming out in a thin voice as she explained the situation. The officers responded quickly, following her back to David's house to investigate. With the police by her side, Sarah returned to David's house where the horrifying events had unfolded moments before. She trembled with fear and adrenaline, still unable to believe what she had seen. The house was now silent, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos Sarah was experiencing. The officers, armed and cautious, moved through the house with Sarah closely following. Each room was a reminder of the terror she had faced. Disturbing photos, stolen personal items, and the certainty that she had been moments away from a terrible fate. As the officers meticulously examined every detail, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She wanted to find enough evidence to ensure that David could never do this again. The silence inside the house was suffocating, only broken by the muffled sound of the officers' voices and their careful steps. Finally, in one of the rooms, one of the officers urgently called the others. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. They had found a secret basement hidden behind a heavy bookshelf. The steps creaked under her feet as they descended, revealing a small, dark space. The officers' cell phone lights illuminated walls covered with photos, ropes, and other disturbing items. Sarah swallowed hard, feeling a chill run down her spine as she realized the extent of David's sick obsession. The police continued to search, finding more evidence linking David not only to his obsession with Sarah but also to other crimes. There were meticulous records of his movements, photos of other women, and even a collection of newspaper clippings about unsolved cases in the area. Sarah felt like she was in a horror movie, witnessing up close what happens when obsession turns into something much more sinister. She knew she had narrowly escaped, and a wave of gratitude and terror flooded over her simultaneously. As the police continued their work, arresting David and gathering evidence, Sarah felt a sense of urgency. She needed to leave that place behind, to leave behind the disturbing memories and try to find a way to move forward. Emerging from David's house, Sarah was enveloped in the comforting arms of one of the officers. They took her away from the scene to a safe place where she could finally begin to process what had happened. The relief was palpable as she looked back, watching David being taken into custody. Her voice had finally been heard, and she hoped her courage could inspire other victims to stand up against terror and obsession. Sarah knew her life would never be the same after that day. But she also knew she had survived, and there was a road ahead, full of hope and possibilities. With renewed courage, Sarah decided it was time to do something meaningful with her experience. She approached the police to offer her testimony, ensuring that David would face justice for his crimes. Sarah also committed to sharing her story on YouTube, not only as a form of personal therapy but as a warning message to others who might be facing similar situations. In the video, Sarah shared the harrowing moments she had lived through, from the initial messages and gifts to the terrible day she was captured by David. She emphasized the importance of trusting one's instincts, seeking help, and never underestimating signs of danger. If you are going through something similar, Sarah said firmly, please don't be afraid to seek help. You are not alone and there are people willing to help. Together, we can fight fear and darkness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more chilling tales like this one. All our stories are based on real-life experiences. Like this video and share it with a friend so they can also learn about this frightening story. Until the next video.